Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Test and Segment Your List for Success. I'm Jill Bastian, and joining me today is Amber Cleve, and we're going to go over some information on how to test subject lines in various parts of your email, and then we'll do a quick demo on how to use our segmentation tool at the end. Just a couple things before we get started. This webinar is being recorded. That's usually the number one question we get for any of the webinars we do. We'll send out a follow-up email after the webinar's over later in the week, and then we'll include a link to this recorded webinar for you so you can go over this again at a later date. Also, we do have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. The webinar itself is probably about 20 to 25 minutes long, and then we'll take questions until 10:30 Pacific time. If there's more questions after that, I'm happy to stay and answer them, but you don't all have to stay around if you don't want to. So as you think of questions along the way, if you look in your GoToWebinar window, there's a box that you can type questions into. So feel free to enter whatever information or whatever questions you have in there, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Also, if you look at this slide, we do have a Twitter hashtag for our webinars, any of our webinars, and so you can follow along on there as well if you'd like.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Amber Cleve, and we will start with the agenda for our Test and Segment Your List for Success webinar. So we will be going over the do's and don'ts of testing, what to test, a recap, and then, as Jill said, there's a demo of the segmenting tool and a Q&A session as well. So the first thing, the do's and don'ts of testing your emails. So you might think you know what will perform, but you should test it anyways. You will be surprised. We have been. So we recommend taking some risk and just not assuming that you know what will perform best. It's up to your audience. So you can split your list a couple different ways. We have some suggestions here. You can do 70% versus 30% if you just want to split it into two lists, or you can split your list three ways. Another example of that would be 80% for the biggest part, and then 10% and 10%. And so that could be for you could do your control at 80%, and then if you have two other variables that you wanted to test, you can send those to your smaller segments of your list. So we recommend 2 to 3 segments. Also, there's list size to keep in mind. So you want to make sure your list is big enough to test. If you're splitting it three ways at 80, 10, 10, and your list is only 100 emails, that might not yield a big enough population to get really good results. So that's something to keep in mind. Then what you want to do is, first things first, figure out what you want to improve upon so you can figure out what you want to test. So some things here are your click-through rate, your open rate, conversion, unsubscribe rate, and then keep in mind that it's different for everyone. So stats vary from industry to industry, list to list, business to business. So all of those variables make a difference. And you want to test the same thing multiple times. Just a one-shot-in-the-dark test will give you some good results, but you want to test it over and over again to really make sure that the results are consistent, and so you can know that one thing is really performing better and will consistently perform better and give you the results that you want. So there are some variables too that can change that based on the audience that you're sending to, the time of day that you send, day of the week that you send. So you can test it the same thing at a few different times, to different lists, different days, and then kind of see if those factors are also influencing the results. And then you can find out how successful something really is. So there are also a couple of don'ts to keep in mind. You don't want to test too many things at once because then you don't know what it is that's contributing to the results and what's performing the best. So we recommend having a control that would be the way that you would normally do it, and then one or two variables that are going to change. and then you can compare them against what you usually do. It's kind of a scientific method. And then don't divide your list by more two than three. We talked about that above, some ways there. That the more lists you have, the less accurate the results are. So you just want to keep it relatively simple. And then moving on to things to test in your emails. So if you want to affect your open rate, you can test the following things. One would be the from name that the email is coming from. So there are a few examples here. You could do your company name. For us, that would be vertical response. Or you could do a person's name. If we wanted to change that and test, we could do our CEO, Janine Popick, for example, and have an email coming from her and see, do people respond better to the company or to a person? It really depends. And that could also be variable for B2B or B2C. If it's a B2B, it might perform better with a company name versus a B2C. Maybe they want it a little more personal, and you could try a specific person's name. Also, to affect your open rate, you could test your subject line. And we actually have a whole webinar on subject lines, so there are lots to say about it. We just have a few things here. One thing for subject lines that you could test would be long versus short. Another thing would be the type of promotion. You could do 50% off versus half off. We have a few examples here. Living Social did 50% off Candy Bar, and Groupon has half off at Bombay India Restaurant. So you can see if people respond better to that. You could also do a dollar amount versus a percent off. That's another idea. And then you could test personalization in the subject line. This one really depends on personal preference. Some people find it very like big brother and a little intrusive, but a lot of people really like it because it seems very personal and like the email is speaking to them. So here's an example where it just says, Megan, here are your cheaps of the week. So that calls out the person's name, and it's like, oh, this email is for me. Then there's also a clear call to action versus a description of an offer, and we have a few examples here. So here for the CTA, it's catch the giants. So that's calling the reader to take an action. And then we also have here Red Sox ticket discount available, and the ticket discount is giving a description of what the offer is. Then we have change it based on the audience. That could be like a new customer list versus an old customer list. A different subject line would be more directed towards the audience. So if they're a new customer, they might want something like, here's what our company is about. If it's an old customer, they kind of understand, and so you could be a little less direct with them. Then there's also a sense of urgency. You can test that time limit, last day. And then, of course, some things to test that will affect your open rate are the frequency of the send. And then I talked about this a little bit before, but day and time of send. You could test sending the same email on a different day of the week and seeing if it gets a better result. Or a different time, sending 6 a.m. in the morning versus 5 p.m. and seeing if people are responding better during work or after work. So some more about what to test in your emails. If you want to influence your click-through rate or your conversions, you can test your email content. So there's long versus short copy, and you'll see we have this image over here to the right. And this would be an example of a shorter copy that clicks through to the larger article. We have the button here, it says read more, and that goes to the rest of the blog where this is just like a condensed teaser version of copy. Then there's clear and simple for body content and headlines. You could also test testimonial versus no testimonial, and this is an example of like a new customer might respond better to a testimonial about the company, whereas an old customer or someone that's been around for a while might not need the testimonial, and that might be kind of old news to them. So that's an example of where content would depend on the audience, so you could split that up to different lists. Also, you can test your offer. We talked a little bit about this, but percentage versus dollar off, free versus reduced versus complimentary. There's lots of different ways to say free on us. So you could test that and see what your list responds to best. And then you could also include a time limit, time sensitive, urgency. So here in this little orange box here, it says today only. So people know, okay, there's a time limit if I'm going to respond to this. And you can see, does that sense of urgency get people to use this promo code at checkout and make a purchase? You can also test your call to action. So as you see over here, we have a button that says find out more and a text link that says find out more. And you can see, does my audience respond better to the button or the text link? Then there's also placement or number of CTAs. You can add a text link or a button at the top, at the middle, at the bottom, all three, and see, do they respond better with it in a certain position in your email? Um, and so that's definitely something to test.
And we do track the clicks in the email, so you'll be able to see which one is getting more clicks, and that's how you're going to be able to know, is it the button that they're clicking on, is it a particular link that they're clicking on, so that part of the reporting in your vertical response account will help you with your testing.
Absolutely. Definitely you want to look through and see what are the results, and as Jill said, we have all that for you. And then there's also the way you say it. We have here find out more, but you could also say something like get more info or check it out and see what do they respond better to. And then another thing that you can test is your unsubscribe rate. And things that you can test that will affect that are your from label. And as we talked about this, a company name versus a person's name versus maybe a name of the department. We at Vertical Response have a lounge newsletter that goes out of with a different from label. It says marketing lounge. So seeing if people recognize that and how they respond to that. And if they don't recognize it, they'd be more likely to unsubscribe. We recommend testing this, but overall you also want to be consistent because people form a relationship with the from label. So you want to be careful in doing that. As well, the subject line will influence unsubscribe rate. If it sounds very spammy, people might unsubscribe from your email, mark it as spam, delete it. So subject line is good for unsubscribe rate. And remind your recipient who you are and where and when they signed up. If you include this in your email, people know, okay, I signed up for this email. It's not spam. I'm not going to unsubscribe. And we have an example here that says, you're receiving this newsletter because you're a vital member of the Shoebox Studio family. So it lets them know, okay, I am a part of this. This is important to me. I signed up for this. Another thing is frequency. If you overmail or undermail, people will be likely to unsubscribe. If you overmail, they're just going to get annoyed. If you undermail, people won't recognize you or they'll forget about you. So you want to test and find out what is that perfect frequency. Another thing is personalization in the email. And we have an example here that says, dear first name, last name. So you can do first name and last name. You could do customer account, company name, whatever information that you track and you have in your database, you could personalize in that way. And you can test and see what do they respond better to. And then we have comparing your results using the VR dashboard. As Jill said, we track all of that data, the click data, open rates. So it's there for you to look at. So you can compare your different lists and see which one performed better. You can compare an email to a different email. And we have a reports tab where you can set up to 5 campaigns to compare. Then you can compare the various open rates, click-through rates within emails or from email to email, unsubscribe rates, conversions. And you want to continue to track track your results over time and keep on testing to figure out what performs best. And a recap of the testing strategies. So as I mentioned in the very beginning, you might think you know what is going to perform the best, but you have to test it to find out. And we've been surprised multiple times. So we here at Vertical Response actually call it the bizarro world of email testing because we constantly think we're in email marketing, we know what's going to work, and our audience continues to surprise us. One example that we have that was really interesting is we had an email where we did copy long versus short. One of the emails was practically a novel. It was really, really long. And then we took that information, we put it on a landing page, and then we had another email that was very short that just had one CT on there that said, click here to find more info, that went to the one that had a landing page with all of the information that was actually in the email of the other one that we were comparing. So it was an A to B, one-to-one test. And we were sure that the shorter one would perform better, but the long one, because it had a lot of links and a lot of places to click, actually performed better. And we were really surprised by that. Another thing is that once you find something that works, you want to continue to use that. And then when it stops, you want to test it again. It's constantly evolving. And then remember that different audiences will respond differently. So you want to test the different audiences. And then don't stop testing. That's a way to stay on top of it and make sure everything's fresh so that you can keep it fresh.
So here are some resources. We do have the VR Marketing Lounge, which is basically a forum of people using vertical response, and you can go and talk about different things in there. So you could certainly talk about testing your subject lines or other ideas for things to test and see how it's worked for other people, and they'll certainly give you ideas on what you could test as well. We also have our help site to help you use our segmentation tool, which I'm going to demo in just a minute. So if you have questions along the way, you can certainly use that. It has some short videos. They're all about 2 minutes long, as well as some text tutorials there. The Vertical Response blog is a great resource for just about anything you want to do with your email marketing, including testing your subject lines and other things to test. There's been blogs on all kinds of things throughout the year, so you can go and take a look there. One of the questions we get, because we talk about it in this particular webinar, is the call to action buttons. And you saw some of them on a couple of the slides. We did have a blog post in May, and we had buttons that you can get from that web page. You can just download those buttons and use them on your own emails if you want to test out your click-through rate with either a button or a link. And so this is the blog right here. And you can kind of look in the blog itself for buttons, and it should come up. You can also look in May because it was posted in May. But you can also just get this URL. Like I said, we're recording this, so you'll be able to get that as well. And so now I'm going to do a demo. So this is your vertical response account. Hopefully, because you guys are at this particular webinar, this is something that you're familiar with. So you've been into your vertical response account. This shouldn't surprise you. This is our list segmentation tool, and this is found under the list section in this blue navigation bar up here at the top of the account. Just click on segments and it'll bring this up. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways to set up your list using the segmentation tool so that you can do the different types of testing that Amber was talking about throughout the presentation today. So I'm going to click on New Segment, and I'm going to give this segment a name. I'm going to call it August. You can call it whatever you want. This is for you to be able to keep track of your data, so call it anything you want. You can also put a description in here if this is a segment that you're going to be running on a regular basis. Now I'm going to click on Choose Segment Type. So there's quite a few different segments that you can set up in our system. This is a really powerful tool. You can chop up your list and your data from your email campaigns in all kinds of ways using this tool. So the first option is segment just by list member. So you're only going to take information from your mailing list. Anything that's found in your mailing list can be used with the segmentation tool. You also have the option, as I said, to use data from your campaigns. The advanced segment option will allow you to split up or create a list based on information from lists and campaigns. It isn't one or the other. You can take both of them together to create a new mailing list. And you can also merge either campaign recipients to create a new list or merge your list members to create a new list. We're going to concentrate on these top ones up here. This is pretty straightforward down here. So I'm going to select Segment List Members Only and go to click Save and Build Segment. So the first thing I'm going to do here is select the list that I want to segment. So I'm going to do a split test. So as Amber was saying earlier, wrong coworker. As Amber was saying earlier, there is different ways to split your list. You could do a list of 70-30 or 80-10-10, depending on how you want to do your testing. So you want to take the list that you want to do your testing with, and it could be more than one if you wanted to create one list. But I'm going to take my Chicago customers list here. So I'm just going to select that one, and I'm going to click Done. And now I can set up a filter. But because I'm just splitting my list, I'm not going to fill in anything here. I don't need to filter my results. I just need to split my list. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save and Get Results. And the next page is going to give me an overview of how my segmentation is working. Because I'm just splitting my list, it's just going to be a handful of people. It just gives you about 200 results, but this is just my list, so this isn't going to change anything. I'm going to click Save Results, and this is where I can split my list up. So I've taken my list, and now I can slice it up. So I can do multiple lists, and this will give me the option to split my list. So if I wanted to do 70-30, I can type in 70-30, and our system's going to keep track of the percent that you've set up. So make sure it equals 100%, and we'll let you know if it doesn't. So this would create two random lists for me where I can test 30% with one of my options. So I could do a percent in my subject line, for instance, and then mail 70% of my list with like half off or something like that. Whatever you're testing, you can do it this way. If I wanted to do the 80-10-10, I would change the number of lists to 3. And then I would come in here and I would set up 80, 10, 10. And so now the system will split up my list into 3 lists of random addresses in here that I can use for my testing. Again, you could send whatever you normally send to the 80% and then whatever you're testing to these 2. You could also try testing your subject line to this smaller list, find which works better, and then send the bulk of it to the large one, however you want to do your testing. But this makes it really easy for you to set up a smaller list. So if I go ahead and click Create Lists, this is going to slice up my list randomly into those 3 sections. So these are my 3 lists. August number 1 has the bulk of it, 80%, and then these are the other 2 that have been created. So if I go to View Mailing Lists, I will be able to see them. Here they are. All my lists have been set up, and they're ready for me to send out my test emails. Now let's go back into the segment tool here and create a new segment. So there's other things that you can split your list up by. So if you wanted to set up, I'm going to do, I have to call it something different. So I can go ahead and leave my segment by list members only, as I had done previously. Click Save and Build Segment. And then this time I can select a couple of lists if I wanted to. I could include the master list if I wanted to as well. So I can select those 3 lists, click Done, and then I could set up a filter. So I could take the information from these lists and create a list based on, for instance, I could do a regional type of list. So if I wanted to invite people in a particular region to come to an event that I was doing, I could use this. You can also use this to split up your list for people who are customers and send them a more targeted email. So people you know who've made a purchase in the last 6 months. You could create a mailing list to send a special offer to them to create a more targeted list. And this is something that we talk about quite a bit, especially in our delivery webinars if you've ever gone to them, to help keep your readers or your customers, the people on your mailing list, more engaged by sending them more specific emails instead of sending one monthly email to everyone that may or may not have the info they're looking for. So I could set this up, whoops, wrong one, city equals San Francisco, city equals, whoops, Oakland. I can add another filter. So I could set up a filter for cities around the Bay. So this is going to create a mailing list of people who live in San Francisco and Oakland and Daly City. Now that's probably going to get me a list of 0 because it's really hard for people to live in 3 places at once. But you can change this operator from and to or. This is going to depend on how you're trying to segment your list or split your list up. So in this case, I need people who live in one of these, not all of them. So if I go ahead and click Save and Get Results, I'm going to create a mailing list that has people who are in just this area. Now you can also do a more advanced segment of your mailing list as well. You can click to switch to advanced mode. And now I can add more rules to this. I could add another list rule. So my current list rule is rule number 1, people of these 3 lists who are in one of these 3 cities. That's my list rule. I can add another list rule, and I can take my same lists, and this time I can set up a filter of people who are customers. Customer equals yes. So this way I would be creating a mailing list of people who live in this area but are customers who have made purchases from me, if that's the criteria I'm looking for. Now in between my 2 list rules, there is another operator and it says or. So my list would be people who live in these 3 cities or people who are customers. I could change this to and by clicking on it so that I would have a mailing list only of customers who live in the Bay Area. And there's one more that I can click on to be exclude. By doing exclude, I would be making a mailing list that basically is a suppression. So instead of doing a suppression on your account, you could actually create a mailing list of people who are very specific and you know that the people you do not want to include are in there. So by clicking on exclude, I would be creating a mailing list of people from these 3 lists who live in these cities, and I'm going to exclude the people who are already customers because I don't want to send this particular email to them. So there's a lot that you can do with this particular tool to break up your emails. I could also remove this rule here. It's a busy emergency vehicle day. That's the second one to go by. I could also add a campaign rule. So in addition to using the lists, you could also take data from emails that you've sent out. So if I wanted to create a list for people who, for instance, opened my July newsletter, I have now the options with the campaign rules to also create a list of people who've opened or clicked. And I can set up a specific date range that they've opened, if they've clicked on a particular link in my email. So you can make very, very targeted mailing lists using this. I could also do did not open. So if I wanted to send a follow-up email to people who had been invited to an event and hadn't opened the email, so they haven't responded to my event invite, I could resend it to them by using this particular feature in the account. So there's a lot you can do this, and you can continue adding more rules up here if you want to make a very, very targeted specific mailing list. But the more rules and the more filters you're adding in here, the less people you're going to be pulling into your mailing list. So I can also remove this if I want to, and I can go ahead and save my original query. It's saving it. It's just taking a minute. And we'll just say that it finished it, and basically it goes through the same steps that we saw before. So it'll give me a preview of how this is going to look. So our system's basically querying the data in your account that's in your mailing list. We're going to give you a preview of how these parameters you've set up will pull into the information in your list to make sure everything looks right, that you're getting the results that you expect. And that's what this is coming up. I think my connection is getting slow. It was really slow yesterday too. And then you'll be able to finish creating the list just like we did earlier on the first list that we did. So we'll give you a preview, then you'll be able to save your mailing list, and the system will upload it as a list into your account, and then you'll be able to use that to send your emails. So this is the preview. You can see these are people who all live in San Francisco, so that's falling into the right parameters, and I can create my mailing list. Since I don't need to test this, this is a very specific mailing list, I'm not going to split it up. I'm just going to save it as one mailing list instead of splitting it up. So I can go back and take a look at my mailing list. And here's August second try. So I had 220 people who fell into the parameters that I set